Are you trying to learn ham radio? Does it appear to be more difficult than it should be? Have you watched several YouTube videos out there and you feel like they're talking a foreign language? Do you come from a non-technical background like myself and looking for someone to make it more simple? Then you've come to the right place. I've done a 4-part series on the basic introductions to ham radio. This is part 2. Strongly suggest that you would watch part 1 first, since each video actually builds upon the other to help you give you a better overall understanding of what ham radio is and how to operate in it. So if this is something you want to watch, let's get started. Hey, this is MJ, call sign KO4TWA, and welcome to Ham Radio Made Simple. This is part 2 on the ongoing series into the introductions to the basics of ham radio, and this is part 2 of the UHF VHF bands. Now, I broke this into a 4-part series. Parts 1 and 2 are directed toward the technician license, and they have access to the UHF, the VHF bands. Parts 3 and 4 are directed to the general license, and they have access to the HF or your high-frequency bands. Now, this is part 2 in the series. If you have not watched part 1, this will make no sense to you. So please go look at the description below, hit the link, watch part 1 first, and then you can come back and watch this. Now, I'm going to be getting into advanced features, and again, a disclaimer, not something you need to get up and running today. What I showed in episode 1 is more than enough for 6 months to a year to have fun operating with your ham radio in the UHF, VHF bands. So please, as we get into this, it is more technical and complicated. Do not hit the panic button. Rather hit the subscribe button and the like button. And remember, you can save this for future reference. Some of the topics I'm going to be covering today is getting into detail about the digital voice mode, a little bit deeper dive into repeaters, gateways, nodes, and reflectors. Again, a deeper dive into the repeater book. I'm going to go over workflows for digital voice by manufacturer. I'm going to talk about hotspots and how you can use that when you can't access one of these repeaters. So when we talk about some modes that are out there, like an analog voice, you have AM, FM, and single sideband. Those are modes. And remember, the single sideband, I'll talk more about on the HF bands. Add another mode, digital voice. And digital voice can be broken into, I look at it as basically 3 classifications. The DMR, which we discussed as your digital mobile radio. It is an open standard. Multiple manufacturers, but one of the bigger ones is the Bridgecom. Using their Anytone phones will reach the DMR repeaters. But when you use Icom, you're going to have to go through their D-Star system. If you use Yaesu, it's their system fusion system. Now, I'm only doing voice, so I'm not talking about other modes that are out there. So again, if you walk away from the slide, AM, FM, digital voice, think of those as 3 critical modes. So when we look at some of these repeaters to operate, it's going to be manufacturer specific for the most part. So if I'm using a Yaesu radio, I have to use the system fusion to do the DV. When I'm looking at Icom, theirs is called the D-Stars. And the DMR repeaters basically are the ones that use the open standard. So vendors like Bridgecom, Anytone phones, they can use it, as well as any other manufacturers, provided they're using the open standards too. So when we talk about a few key terms, remember what a gateway is. It's simply a computer. Think of it, that hardware and the software. It's a device at the repeater, connected to it, and it sends the ham radio signals through the internet. Very simplistic, but that's all you need to understand. A node is when you have a repeater with a gateway. So a gateway-enabled repeater is a node. Same thing. And now a reflector is more specific to when you get into the Icom way of doing things in their terminology. And it's a device that connects multiple nodes together. It's a type of conferencing system. So remember what a repeater looked like? You had antennas high up on buildings, water towers, mountains, whatever. And you had your hardware equipment located right near these antennas. And one of the hardware and the software operates as the repeater. When you add the second piece of equipment, the gateway, with the software and the hardware, it's now connected to the internet. It becomes a node. Now, most repeaters out there are analog repeaters. but you will find some specific to each manufacturer. So if I have Icom, which I do the Icom like 5100, I need to find those that are D-Star repeaters specifically. And the same can be said if I have a Yaesu equipment. I have to use the Fusion specific repeaters. Now, the DMR repeaters, again, using open standards. Anyone using those open standards can hit those repeaters. When you look at companies like EchoLink and All-Star, they're more software applications that can operate in the ham radio world, but they too require to link into specific repeaters. So again, remember when we went into Repeater Book and I showed you the features, the DMR, you can look at System Fusion, which is the Yaesu, D-Star is the Icom, EchoLink is the software, All-Star, same thing. I can select on one of those and then start a deeper search. So, for example, if I start my search in either D-Star or the System Fusion, I can select by state. So let's say I want to sort by North Carolina and only 2-meter bands or all the bands. And then I hit my search. But let's say we're doing a DMR search at this time. Let's see what we get. So by doing a DMR search, I'm coming up with 77 DMR repeaters found in North Carolina. Now, a couple things you need to walk away from this is that you need to understand the frequency, offset, and tone. Critical elements that you have to enter into your ham radio in order to reach these repeaters. Separate video, separate discussion, but understand that's critical information and this is where you get it. Now, if I want to find the location around me, and there's different sort features. I can sort, for example, by city, by county, by call sign. There are many ways to do it. Typically for me, I do it by county. It gives me a wider geographical area, and hopefully I can hit one of those repeaters. So what's the big deal about having a gateway-enabled repeater or a node? A big deal. Remember when we talked about linked repeaters and we're linking multiple together? This goes to a whole new level. If I could take my local repeater, add the gateway, hardware, software, and now connect through the internet, I can connect to other ones that are doing the exact same thing. And the beauty about this is we all can connect and be dropped into what are known as chat rooms. On a linked repeater, you're essentially all sharing what looks like one repeater. That's not the case here. You could have multiple chat rooms. In some cases, there's 10,000 chat rooms that are out there, all operating on the same time, and I'm not tying up the repeater. So how does this work? Well, first of all, let's look by manufacturer. When you do the Icom approach, you're going to go through their D-Star. They're going to take you to what are known as nets. So if I have a net meeting right now, let's say it's Sunday night, 7 o'clock on a D-Star repeater, it's now open to everyone who can get on a D-Star enabled repeater can eventually connect to that same one I'm in. So now our local meeting can be worldwide. That's essentially what's happening right now. When you're talking about Yaesu, they're going to call them rooms. It's pretty much the same thing, but allows you also to be able to just go to a particular repeater and be able to have conversations, not necessarily at a scheduled time. Now, Bridgecom, they do it and they call it talk groups. They have 10,000 of these. So at a very high level, let's see how this works. I'm on my transceiver, handheld device. I hit my local repeater, which is gateway enabled. I connect to a node. Now I'm going to do some kind of activation that's going to allow me to, again, move through that node to connect to all of the nodes. And I'll show you that in a second here. And then I can either select a net, I can select a room or a talk group, depending on the manufacturer. And now we're all talking in a room. And each vendor, remember, does it differently. And when you hear the term reflector, that's pretty much to Icom standards and on how they do it. So if we look at the Yaesu Fusion enabled repeaters, they do it a little bit different. So this is how this is going to work. I'm on my Yaesu handheld. I hit my local Fusion repeater. I'm going to connect to the node at the repeater. Then there's going to be some kind of handshake that has to take place, whether it's I hit a wires X button or a function button like P3 on my microphone, handheld microphone. There's some sort of function that's going to cause a handshake. This is going to allow me then to pick the room that I want. I'm now connected to the wires X chat rooms. And at that point, I pick the room, and now I'm in that room talking, and I could be talking in a room that is in Sydney, Australia. Pretty cool. Now, one thing to remember, you're going to have to disconnect when you're done. Not only do you connect, you link, you also have to disconnect. And in this case, their function is 99999. Again, everyone does it a little bit differently. Nice thing is, from your last meeting, just save it in the memory, and you don't have to program or remember that number again. And this is all happening through the beauty of the internet. Now, when we look at DMR, again, they do it differently. What you have to know about the DMR system, especially when you look at the Bridgecom Anytone phone, it requires software and what is known as code plugs. I mentioned it maybe earlier in the last video, where you have to program this into your radio. Now, it is a heavy lift, and there are step-by-step walkthroughs in how to do this. But once you get that done, it's an easier system to use, and you have access to over 10,000 different talk groups to join. And again, their disconnect, remember, look down here, is 1. So let's take you through the DMR way of doing it. I'm on my Anytone phone. I'm hitting my local repeater specifically for DMR. I'm going to select the talk group from the memory channel because it is programmed in. There is going to be an activation. I'm going to activate it, and then I'm in the room. It's not that difficult. But again, 10,000 rooms, they'll break it down into zones to make it a little bit easier. But really what you're going to be looking at is off the list, you're going to pick maybe a dozen or more that you really seem to have some kind of interest to. But literally, you have access to 10,000. Again, all happening because of the internet. So what are some of these talk groups listed I keep talking about? TGIF or Brandmeister, there's several ones that are out there under the DMR heading. And here is a talk group. Look at it, think of it as channels, 101, 102, or room 103. I'm going in the room 104. So 110 takes you to all of North America. 111 takes you all to Europe. Or I can go on 115 and I can do trucker talk. I can either go, again, general, large location, very specific location, general interest, very specific interest. Again, I can't scroll through all of this. So if you get a chance, just go through one of the talk groups list and you'll be blown by the options and the numbers that you have. So when we talk about Icom, they're going to use the term reflectors in the way they connect it. So D-Star system uses the reflectors, and they're going to link specific repeaters where they have net meetings. And again, that's what I talked about. So the repeater in my area, if people want to join it and it's on a D-Star repeater, they can access it because as long as it is on a D-Star repeater, it is open. And they'll publish a list and say, hey, here are all the net meetings that are out there. Go at it. And again, most are based on a location. If you go through the list, you'll see the Florida D-Star net, Dutch D-Star net, or it could be, again, very specific by interest. Now, there are a group of like 10 reflectors that you connect through the Icom system. And the most popular one is, they call it Echo Charlie. These 10 groups of reflectors basically allow for that same functionality through all these nodes to take place. Again, different way of doing it. So if I have my repeater, and I have a repeater now with a gateway, again, specific to Icom, and then I can connect to all the other repeater gateways in the Icom system. So essentially, I'm going to go through a gateway to a reflector to a net. That's simply how it operates. So if I look at the repeater list, how I can activate it and sort through it. And the nice thing is they have a very nice and easy way to upload this in your radio through like a little ScanDisk card to be able to do it. But if I look at the dstarinfo.com site, here are all the nets throughout all of the United States. And then we start with Alabama. You can go through it. And these are hyperlinks, and I can pull up and find specifically more information about that net that I might be interested in because, again, this might be a private club, a group of people. These are fixed scheduled type of nets that are out there. Again, looking at the list in greater detail, specifically for the RACES group we talked about. It could be for a Pacific division, the Kentucky D-Star. There's just all sorts. Here's the time that they meet, and here is the name. So all of this stuff is going to be important when you're programming it because you have to know where to go when you're using the D-Star system. So in quick summary again, think about it. I am actually going through the reflectors to get to these nets. The Yaesu list, you can see in their wires X active room ID list. Here is the number that you're going to see. And here's the identifier right here. Here's the room name and some information and comments to make about it. Again, a list, you look at it, you program which ID number you want to get to into your phone. Now, let's switch over to something else here. When we talk about Raspberry Pi and ham radio, it is something that's real and you don't need it. But it was developed in the UK by Raspberry Pi Foundation. And essentially what you're getting here is it's a small, low-cost computer. It's about the size of a credit card. It has open source operating system with firmware onto it. And that's where you're going to hear, Raspberry Pi device. And it's specific to ham radio. And this is where we get into hotspots. This is what you use in a hotspot. So what is a hotspot? Simply put, think of it as it's a small device, that little device that's going to be right next to your transceiver. And it's going to be an internet doorway or gateway to access DV, digital voice. And so it's going to connect either through your computer to your Wi-Fi or directly to your Wi-Fi. And some people actually use their hotspot on their phone, and they can go down a freeway, highway with the hotspot and their cell phone, using the hotspot on their cell phone, which basically is their Wi-Fi. Think of it that way. And now they're using their phone to connect out to the internet through the hotspot through their handheld or mobile device. So let's talk more about what a hotspot is and actually how it works. So if we look at the different manufacturers and the types that come out there, you can see they all look different. And there's at least 12 manufacturers, and all of them have their own way of making their hotspot work. Some are more advanced, like the OpenSpot, which is about the size of a computer mouse, can fit in your pocket, totally wireless. Other ones may require connections directly to your computer. So all different types and price ranges associated with each of the manufacturers based on what they can do. So basically how it's going to work, you're going to take your handheld radio, you're going to want to sync it with your specific hotspot device. So it's only going to be enabled for your device. It's going to require you downloading the Raspberry Pi OS operating system on your PC, on your laptop, whatever, connected to your hotspot device. Once you have it all programmed and it's working, if you want, depending on the manufacturer, some of them allow you to be in a better situation where you never have to go through the computer again outside the initial setup. And you're going to go from your radio to the hotspot right to your Wi-Fi, and you don't even have to leave your computer or your PC operating in order to make a call. Next is to understand that when you're talking a hotspot, essentially becomes like it's a local repeater or node where it has internet capability through the gateway portion of the repeater. So you don't need access to an enabled repeater specifically for your manufactured handheld radio. This is a way to bypass all of this stuff. Prices range from $90 to $400. The better ones, you're going to want to get the Wi-Fi direct connect versus leaving your PC or your laptop open in order to operate. Now, when we talk about hotspots and where they play a role in, let's first kind of back up and take you through a digital workflow in two areas, one using a Fusion system and one using a D-Star system. So let's say Colin in Charlotte wants to reach a chat room. So he's going to reach out and hit his Fusion-enabled repeater through the programming of his radio, hits the Wires X button, goes through the internet, takes him up to his talk group. Now, just so you can see, D-Star is similar but different. Colin, if he had an Icom radio, he'd hit a D-Star-enabled repeater. The gateway would take him to one of the reflectors. He'd choose one of the 10 reflectors, and then he would choose where he wants to go from that, and it would take him up to what is known as a D-Star net, or essentially take him anywhere. He can actually end up having access to any D-Star repeater anywhere in the world. So it's just not trying to get into a talk group. He can just drop himself off, for example, in Berkeley, California, where Rufus is. If there was a D-Star enabled repeater there, he can actually just drop off there and talk to people as if he was talking on his own local one. Think of it as a glorified linked repeater type of setup. Now, poor Rufus, he can't connect to any repeaters in his area that are enabled because he lives in Berkeley, California, and they burned them all down. So he's stuck. He's going to have to use the hotspot. So all he has to do is have his hotspot, like we mentioned, it's programmed, it's all set up, it connects him to the internet, and now Rufus is talking in the chat rooms, whether it is one of the three manufacturers' technology platforms, he can get up into that area pretty easily. And this is where the market is moving, because in reality, most likely you're not going to have access, like myself, where I can hit one of those enabled repeaters. Some of them are not even in my area whatsoever, and the other ones are just outside of the reach where I want to go. So the hotspot is the workaround. Again, comparison on digital voice companies that are out there. We mentioned Icom, Yaesu, and the DMR mobile radios. In particular, the one, if you're going to look at these, really look at the Bridgecom Anytone radios. By far the best that's out there, and you're going to be very happy with those radios. And they're moderately priced, to be honest with you, to get started. They all require you to connect to one of their repeaters, very similar. You have to go through an internet connection. It can take you to one of their talk group things, very similar. A couple differences. Icom D-Star requires you to go through reflectors. That's in your radio. You're going to have to program that. You won't see that in these other two. The other thing is this is very easy to set up. The dstarinfo.com. You can download it onto a scanned disk, and depending on, again, what type of equipment that you're using from Icom, I was able to program that right into my radio. So very simple and easy to put all of their net information into it. Wires X rooms, from what I believe at this point, I think it's pretty much manual. You put them in. However, once you get them in, very, very easy to use, very short process. It's easier than the Icom D-Star system. When it comes to DMR, heavy lift on trying to get those I call them code plugs, which is essentially programming all of the talk groups into your DMR radio. There are other DMR vendors out there that use, other standards outside of open system standards. Don't want to get into it. It's more confusing. So let's just keep with the simple. So assuming that you're going to use an Anytone radio, understand you're going to have to do code plug. But once those are in, it's really easy to use from that point going forward. They're priced to mid-range, on the lower end. You can get started with a DMR radio, and I think you'd be very, very happy. Now, some cool technology that's out there. One company, it's called EchoLink. It's essentially software you download from them. It's free, runs on a Microsoft Windows platform, and it allows your PC, for example, my laptop, to be turned into a ham radio device, especially when I'm traveling. So I have to be a registered user with EchoLink. I have to be a licensed user and show them my license. Once that's done, I have access to the EchoLink software system. So what does that essentially do? Picture me traveling, or yourself traveling. I'm in Tampa, Florida, and I want to hit my EchoLink repeater back in the Raleigh area. I can't reach it with my equipment that I have with me in my suitcase. So I flip open my laptop, connect to the Wi-Fi, pull up the the EchoLink software, and it allows me at that point to connect back very simply to a repeater that I want to, and it happens to be the one in Raleigh. I'm using my space bar as push to talk, the microphone on my laptop as my microphone as if it was my handheld device, my transceiver. So now what I am doing is I am communicating from my laptop via the software back to an EchoLink repeater in Raleigh, North Carolina. It's a really cool technology, and it's a great workaround, especially when you're traveling. Another cool feature you're going to hear a lot about is APRS, which means Automatic Packet Reporting Systems. Essentially, that's monitoring a person's position in real time via their ham radio, provided that radio has GPS. Now, you can do more than just monitor. You can actually send, now they're short, again, I mentioned that, short text messages. You can send images, you can weather reports. All of that can be done through your ham radio with the APRS enabled packet. Again, has to be included in your radio. Now, who is using this? People who are really off the grid, remote areas. They want to have communications. They want people to be able to know if they're still alive because there's no cell towers in those areas. It's a great feature. And again, you'll hear a lot about this in a lot of the YouTube videos that are out there currently. Don't forget, if you're going to want this, you're going to make sure your radio is GPS enabled and also can do APRS. Now, quickly, if you just went out and Googled APRS Tracking Map, this is what you would get. So if my wife wanted to know where I was, and I said, okay, yep, and I do want her to know where I am, I'd have my APRS activation turned on. She can just hover over a spot, one of these spots, you see these Ds on it, and it will allow you to be able to see who the call sign is, where they're at, information, etc. And so this is a way, just using a map, you can find out where people are moving around based on APRS tracking systems. By the way, the WX is just weather. So quickly, in summary here, we talked about different voice modes, AM, FM, now digital voice. So put that in your memory. That's really important. When we get into digital voice, a lot of this is vendor specific on what protocols they use, DMR, open standard. There are other manufacturers such as Yaesu, Icom, which are their own proprietary standards. Again, you'd have to use their radio with their equipment. Hotspots is a great way to get around, I call it the lack of access to one of these enabled gateway repeaters. So they're growing in popularity. You can do it from home. In some ways, it's simpler and easier to do. As far as cool technology, I talked about the EchoLink system and the APRS packet that goes out. And finally, again, make sure you know where your repeaters are. So if you want to get in, for example, and use a DMR radio, then you have to make sure that you have DMR-enabled repeaters that you can reach from where your home is, where your shack is. So repeaterbook.com is going to give you all that information. So upcoming videos real quick. Next two parts are going to be on the HF for those getting their general license. I'll get into licensing as far as walking you through the process of getting your FCC registration license, finding out where local classes may be held, showing you where to go for great websites on taking practice examinations with the exact questions that you will get on the test. And I'll go into more information about that stuff. And then a deeper dive, hopefully shorter, is going to be on programming your repeater, nets and clubs, antennas, programming EchoLink, which is really cool, reducing noise, and prepping. So if you like what I've done so far, please hit the subscribe button. And if you really like what I've done, hit the like button. I appreciate this time with you. This is MJ, call sign K04 TWA with Ham Radio Made Simple, out.